Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa M. Brown. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. I want to welcome our Facebook Live audience. I want to welcome Instagram audience. I want to welcome Twitter, and I certainly want to welcome YouTube. Thank you for joining us tonight. We want you to shout out where you're from. Make sure you put it in your chat. In the comments section, let us know where you are coming from. I know people are here from California, Ontario, California. We see you, Ronnie Jordan, St. Mary's City, Maryland. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to keep shouting you out. Keep letting us know where you come from. Do me a big favor. Do us a big favor and share this Facebook Live. We are on Beyond the Gatekeepers page, and we are on Bishop Yvette Flunder's Facebook Live page. We are on Instagram and YouTube and Twitter under the Beyond the Gatekeepers page. Please, please, please share. Durham, North Carolina is in the house. Indianapolis, Indiana is in the house. Thank you. I see Rivers, New York is in the house. God bless you, Reverend Stacy May. All of the people that are joining us, make sure you share. This is going to be a very, very, very important conversation. We are excited tonight about what we're going to experience, what we're going to hear. And I believe it's going to be a transformative experience. Jacksonville, Florida is in the house tonight. So glad Washington, D.C. is in the house. Santa Clara, California is in the house. Of course, Oakland and San Francisco, California in the house. Greetings from Atlanta, Georgia. God bless you, Veronica, for being with us. Baltimore, Maryland, again, is in the house. Raleigh, North Carolina is in the house. Birmingham, Alabama. Listen, we go east and west, north and south, and all across the water. We are grateful for your presence on tonight. I want to give introduction tonight. We want to get right into it. We don't want to waste any more time on what we're doing here. We just want to make sure that we get into the conversation. Okay, people are saying shout out South Carolina, shout out to South Carolina. Thank you for being here with us on tonight as you all continue to share on every social media platform. And so let me get with our guest tonight. Our guest is Michael Roberson. He is a public theologian. He's the adjunct professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York City and the New School University in New York City. I have known Michael for a very long time, and I am excited about this conversation. And just before I bring him, we're going to be talking about the Ballroom, the Black Church, a freedom movement, and radical pedagogy. And this brother is brilliant. And we just love him. I call him my brother. I have since the day that I met him. And so, Michael, will you come and greet all of our audience tonight?
So good evening. First of all, my absolute wonderful sister, Dr. Bishop-elect Vanessa Brown. When this was coming on, I said, "Oh, this is serious." Y'all had the dun, 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 dun. But good evening. I'm first of all have to give such gratitude for you inviting me into this space to be able to engage in a dialogue like this. Partly and mostly because oftentimes the way that we want to just talk about the house ball community is from this very limited lens, which is about how we perform for other people. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yes, and I know it's so much more to it, so expansive. And you're the person to really tell the story about it. And so I know that when I asked you, I was like, I hope he said yes. I hope he's available. I hope he don't have nothing else to do. And so when you said yes, I was very excited. And of course, to our audience, Bishop Flunder is here with us. We're going to bring her. Of course, you all know that she is the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. But most of all, she is the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California, where they will be experiencing their 30th anniversary in a couple of weeks. So Bishop Flunder, unmute yourself and greet the people and lay a platform for us tonight as we begin this conversation.
I must say that it is my great joy that we, as Beyond the Gatekeepers, have decided among ourselves to embrace this incredibly important conversation. We've had it on the sidelines for quite some time now. We have a beautiful history, myself and the Ballroom Bishop that you're going to meet tonight in our conversation, our beautiful son, Michael Roberson, who came to us very, very concerned when we were in New York City teaching, with that sort of dual reality of being a very spiritual man who is simultaneously called to a group of people who are on the edge, having experienced living on the edge himself, having understood the realities of exile from what is considered essentially church and religion and what we consider holy work, but ordained and appointed and anointed to be the catcher, the helper, the safety net for a number of the young people who have emerged from church, from faith-based organizations. Almost all of our children know something about church. When I say our children, I mean children of color who identify as LGBTQI and the many other alphabets we could talk about. It doesn't fit the whole. And I might also say that I want us to be able to share tonight openly about what has in history been a subculture and has now found its way to theological education. And not just for Michael, not just for him, but for those he is called to serve. Just as a preliminary to this, the house and ball culture, particularly among young African Americans and Latinx folks, is historically been called an underground culture, where the ball culture consists of events that mix performance and dance and lip syncing and modeling. But there's a very real parallel for me because I was raised in the Methodist tradition. And it reminds me of choir processionals and reminds me of offerings when folks used to come down to offer. And when the bishops come in and the women's department comes in and what we call on the sideline, the sachet. That's a real Black word. The sachet, where you wear what you are wearing. You took your time to put it on. You chose carefully. I used to watch my mother and my aunts choose carefully their shoes and their clothes and their hat, and then come down the aisle as though they didn't realize how fabulous they were. But the intention was not only to come down the aisle, but to produce with their bodies that they were healthy, that they were strong, that they were powerful. They dressed to be noticed. I want to put a period and a comma right there. They dressed to be seen. They dressed to be noticed. And it was in their walk and it was in their strut. And there is something about that reality being opened up among our young people to find that confidence again, even though in many cases they have been exiled from church and society. What a powerful gift this man has. And we're going to hear a lot more about the theology and about the realities from the Father, from the one that many call Dad, our own brother, not quite a bishop, but really is a bishop, Michael Roberson. God bless you, Angel. And I am so glad that you're here to help us tonight.
Michael, thank you so much again. And it's like Bishop Flunder said, she already laid the platform. I just want to give a very brief thing of my experience with the house and ball culture. And it goes way back over 30 years at least. And my son, Brian Kamar Anderson, was in a house and his house mother was Tyra Allure. So you know that was a long time ago because she's Dominique now, right? And doing big things on poles. That was many, many, many years ago that he was a part of that. And he came to that because the church put him out because he was recognizing who he was as a young man, right? And as a gay young man. And they were not having it. He was going to an apostolic church and he would get on the bus from Paterson, New Jersey as a teenager and come to the village, Christopher Street, and on the pier. And those were his friends and those were his family. That became his family for him. And so I want to speak his name tonight. Brian Kamar Anderson, we speak your name. He was a part of that for a very, very long time. And I believe that the time that he needed it, it saved his life. So Michael, tell people, my first question to you is because there are many people who are on here that may not know what the house and ballroom culture even is. Can you give us a framework for that?
Thank you. I want to first respond so wonderfully at what you just did in terms of giving honor to. And Bishop Flunder, the thing that you talked about around being exiled, I oftentimes theologize what it meant to come through the womb of that Black woman that I called my mother. That it was in the womb of this Black woman that God had the very first conversation with me about who I was and implanted the very truth in the DNA in my cells so that when I came out, or the womb came out to the world, when the world told me very different about who I was, the truth said, do not believe that in what you're hearing. And this is the honest truth. When I was younger, my construction of cosmology was my mother, God, then Jesus. Ergo, for me, that meant Black women, God, then Jesus. And so as I've gotten older, people say, have you changed that? I said, no, for me, it has always been, again, Black women, God, then Jesus. So in that space that you gave honor to your son, I have to give honor to my mother, because I was blessed to not have the experience that so many people had, that I only came from a place of love. So that being the case, and so I'm going to leapfrog to open up to this piece around what is house ball. You know, Zora Neale Hurston, African American Harlem Renaissance writer, once said that Black women are the mules of the earth, always trampled on over and over and over again. I oftentimes say that Black women have been situated as Christ, right? Always giving, nailed to the cross, so much so that she does so much for everyone else and nothing there for her. And that, for me, if that's the case, then if Black cis women are the mules of the earth, then Black trans women are lodged somewhere between Howard Thurman's notions of disinherited and Franz Fanon's notion of the wretched of the earth. And still, they've created a way out of no way in using the language of Monica Coleman, right? So I'm going to do this real quick as if I was Sophia on the Golden Girls. Honest, true story. I'll do this real quick in terms of this historical thing. Picture this. If absolutely not for slavery, if absolutely not for the Emancipation Proclamation and the Black Reconstruction and its dismantle, if not for the rise of Jim and Jane Crow racism and lynching and the Ku Klux Klan, right? If not for Black folk leaving the southern part of the United States, moving up north, that in which we call the Great Migration, looking for new home, new spaces of freedom. And Harlem becomes the new Black Mecca. If not for between 19 and 1931, the construction or the creation of a Black, radical Black artistic political movement that we call the Harlem Renaissance. If not within that space, that the Black church created a 3-decade campaign to get rid of Black queers in Harlem. There are 3 ways that Black queers congregate at the time: at rent parties, at beauty salons, and drag balls, right? And so, and in fact, the ministers, I won't mention their name, but the minister would publish these very homophobic sermons in the Incident News, warning Black folk who are moving to Harlem that you have to be mindful, because your women are going to want to come up here and be with other women and leave you men. And your men are going to want to come here and be with other men and leave you women. And so there was a contestation, a movement, I call it, created out of contestation of the Black church. And for me, that's why Ballroom, first and foremost, is a Black trans womanist theological discourse, because it created itself not only in contestation to Black church, but also, what does it mean to be homeless in a new home, right? What does it mean to be unfree in this new space that we call freedom? And so, using performance as a way to congregate, to bring people together. And after World War II, where other cities became Blacker, Detroit, DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, these drag balls, they migrate. But in 1967, a Black trans woman named Crystal LaBeija resisted racism in a pageant drag ball circuit. And there was a guy named Phil Black who had he was the only African-American drag performer at the time. He had a Screen Actors Guild card. And he whispers, this is my reimagination, the whispering part, but he whispers in her ear, let's go back to this old Harlem drag ball circuit and the construction, the morphing from drag ball to house ball creates. And drag ball just meant we didn't have language for trans people there, so the language was that we called trans women drag queens. The only people who participated in these balls were trans women, but anyone could come and could see. And so between 67 and 73, you saw the morphing from drag ball to the construction of houses named after famous trans women. We think about Crystal LaBeija as a grandmother. We call the 5 mothers of the modern houseball movement: Papa LaBeija, Dorian Corey, Avis Pendarvis, Duchess LaWong, and Paris Dupree. And so since then, we've had a 50-year plus kinship structure that has migrated across the USA, that's migrated across the seas to other places, some European cities, but even spaces like in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and in Paris, France, where those who are mostly involved in the community are Black Brazilians or African migrants in France. And so, in layman terms, a ball in many ways would be like the Olympics, where you had countries coming to compete, like you have houses coming to compete, and you have a panel of judges of different countries. You have a panel of judges of houses, and people compete. And that's in layman terms. But as we begin to talk, the ballroom is absolutely, utterly more than that. In fact, I am a believer that in the way that it constructed itself in the beginning, is absolutely the way that God intended it to be. It is a Black church. And when I say Black church, I mean beyond the way that we have concretized Christianity. If I could place it in conversation with a guy named Fred Moten, who talks about the Black radical aesthetic tradition, it is in the same way that Black folk, the ontology of Blackness have been congregating beyond that thing that we call Christianity. That we've been doing this because we've had to. It's part of our DNA.
That's powerful, Maku. Thank you for giving us the structure and the significance of House and Ballroom, because a lot of people did not know that, and I see the people on Facebook Live saying, you know, teach us, tell us what it is, and so I think it's very important that we start off with that. So I don't know if I know that the Black church has been adversarial in the past to the house and ballroom culture. I know that, you know, in my mind, when I see the announcer, the person that's saying, you know, the category is the person that's the Billy Porter of the house and ballroom scene. And I do want to mention Pose as we move along, but I see him as the preacher, gathering the people together, you know, getting the categories together, gathering the young men and the young women together so that they can come out and do what they do. Bishop Flunder talked about, you know, the dressing and the styling, and, you know, there are categories in terms of face and all of those things. Those things had to be created. And I want to just basically say how important it was for them to have a safe space, right? When they have been thrown out of their homes. And not everybody, like you said, because you were not one of those kids, but for the most part, a lot of them have been thrown out, and they created family. They created kinship, right? And so tell me a little bit more about this radical pedagogy that you were talking about to me before.
So I absolutely love the way that you framed that, and so I'm gonna back into it a little bit. You know, what led me to seminary was that I was doing public health, and I still do public health. One of the things I do, particularly doing HIV prevention, targeting both Black, Latino, LGBT community, and of course the house ball community as well. And the numbers continue to increase, and I would witness particularly young Black gay men come into an organization and get tested and come out negative and go, shh, but not shh, because they're negative, because it has not happened yet. And I began to continue to hear this theology of abomination, and to make a connection for me that has direct impact on HIV impact in Black gay men, right? That you tell the very people, the very essence of who you are is antithetical to God. It's abomination. And every institution we deem necessary for human growth, church, school, family, community, repeats that message. And then you've been being told that you're supposed to engage in protective factors of a body that's no good to God. It didn't make any sense. So I went to Union to help change that narrative. And my great comrade, Edgar Rivera Colon, is the one responsible for me. You know, with him and my great comrade, Roberson, was talking about me trying to get a PhD program. And Edgar said, but Mike, you keep having this conversation.
Let me just say, bless you, Edgar. I hope you're listening tonight.
Right. And so he took me to, I remember the day he took me to Union. I didn't know what's up there. And the first person I met, he was just showing me around. And the first person I met was Dean Yvette Wilson, Dean Yvette Wilson Barnes, and Derek McQueen. And I knew I had to be here. I knew I had to be there. And so I went to Union. I wanted to shift that narrative. I'm so blessed that my very first semester, I had at 8 o'clock in the morning, Bishop Yvette Flunder for a course called Homosexuality, what does race got to do? Now, and someone would say, how in God's lovely name are you going to seminary talking about a homosexuality? What does race have to do with it? And then right after that, I had Dr. James Cone. Now, you can't get any better, right? And so I immediately thought it was in heaven. So I went to seminary for that reason. And the reason I bring this up, because the way you laid out Ballroom, first and foremost, before I sort of laid that out for Ballroom, I laid that out for Black gay clubs. Because when I was younger, that's what Black gay clubs were. They were Black churches. I think about after Stonewall in 69 and 70s and the construction of white gay ghettos, we call Chelsea in New York City and Montrose, Castro in San Francisco and all these other places where white gay men begin to shop, gym, bank, live in their own communities. Black gay men still had to live in the confines of homophobia within their communities. And so when gay clubs were created for white gay men, when white gay men created clubs, they created clubs to say we're free. Black gay men created clubs to say they know about us now, we need a space of safety. That's a very different trajectory. And so when you came into a club, the DJ was sitting in a thing up here. So here's the preacher. And so the house music was the lyrics. It's a preaching word. Love is a message. Let's have a love hangover. And we danced in erotic ways, but also in political ways. And that was the worship. And so that for me was salvation. I remember going to my first all Black gay club in Virginia before I went in Philadelphia. I thought I was in heaven. But then Ballroom, I became part of the house ball community right after that, was an extension of that. So it made sense that when I went to Union, I went first to talk about Black gay men and HIV and the theology abomination, but looking at Ballroom as a countercultural theological response. And now I could talk later around how the history of Black gay organizing and its classism subjected upon the house ball community ostracized Ballroom folk out of AIDS movement. But now the bodies of Ballroom folks have been a capital consumption of a lot of CBOs and have been on the front lines creating interventions. So the notion of radical pedagogy to leapfrog forward is around, we begin to see in 2007, late December 2006, a young Black gay man in Lorenzo winds up dead. He was in a house of Mugler, goddammit, excuse my language, that was the house name, HIV positive and crystal mouth. And then that January, when the icons in the house ball community, mystery winds up dead, HIV positive. Then we saw more and more and more 2007 and more in 2008, more in 2009. There was this trend. And the conversation we were having was that how are folks dying in 2006, 7, 8, 9? When we had greater access to care, greater access to prevention, how is this happening? And then we realized we're all from the house ball community. And then had to then begin to say, then we're going to have to organize in a way and create what Dr. Marlon Bailey calls intraventions. Not an intervention when someone has power that intervenes in a marginalized community. Now, how does community begin to take care of itself? It's what house ball has always been. It's part of the resilient cultural production house ball community. And as such, we have been doing it since 2007, particularly organized around house ball community. And because of that, in many ways have been positioned to teach the world over how to do the same exact thing. And so a lot of the work that not even Black, but community-based organizations have been doing around HIV prevention in the past 10 years have been the work through house ball community. Here's a community that was ostracized that are now leading the way, creating space, creating interventions, creating new forms of freedom, if you will. It is when Dr. Cone's notion of God of the oppressed, right? When those who have been so marginalized, that redemption comes through them for everybody else.
Bishop Flunder, I know you got something to say. So come on.
It's living on that line. First of all, I want to thank God for the freedom to live on this line. where we are not having to choose in that way. Essentially, we are seeing ourselves as much having the privilege to be in the company of believers who believe in the divine, and in the company simultaneously of our beloved in all of these communities that we have lifted up. Essentially, the wall has broken down. The curtain has been torn, and we have access to both of these realities and many other realities simultaneously. That is a very important thing. And I can recall when, Sylvester was a product of the Church of God in Christ, just like I am a product of the Church of God in Christ. And one of the first things he did was use that incredible soprano range voice of his to sing the songs that he used to sing when he was down in Southern California and in the church, sing the songs sometimes in the club. And I used to listen because the children would come after church to the club. And I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. The children would come to the church and they would come in and they would be dancing on the 1 and the 3, if you understand. But somewhere in the middle, somebody would pull out a subterfuge tambourine. This used to happen. And they would start dancing on the 2 and the 4. It would be the same beat, but they would flip it. And I think you understand what I'm saying, because that would give them the opportunity to bring both their disco dance and their midnight musical dance to the same experience. And I sat back many times and watched that. And I said that what is happening here is a permeation of a wall. This is a community that is saying that if we cannot really be fully ourselves in the context of the people who know who we are, not only do they know who we are, a lot of them cause us to be who we are. And I'm not talking about the creation of God, but I mean actively engaging in living out their realities as same gender loving people. As Sylvester said to me, he said, the people that turn me out, turn me out. It's important for me to say that was a testimony of many people, but they reached a point where they did not want to pretend anymore, which was incredible. So this was a freedom to come and be fully. It's so much like African slaves who had a brush harbor and a place where we could dance and sing and love and express what was really in our hearts without having to pretend to be something other than who we were. It was a secret to some degree, but it was a beautiful thing to say. So I have to say that the passage and the connection is about opening up a way, exploding a wall. And the wall is not just a reality of access. It is a theological breakthrough. It is a physiological breakthrough. It is a psychological breakthrough. It's the kind of thing that will help people not have to take substances to feel better, or have to or put themselves in harm's way carelessly to feel better. When the sun and the light and the glory of God can be seen in places where people would never think that the glory of God can be seen. What a beautiful blessing that is. And I know I can go on and on because it's such a big blessing, but in Harlem, historically, that reality actually also happened for the jazz musicians who came to Harlem, who migrated to Harlem as a mecca for jazz musicians. And right there in those brownstones all over where our folks owned, they would have those late night sessions. And the riffs, am I telling the truth? The riffs
Yes,
and
you are.
music and the way, and Ella Fitzgerald, and I just could go on and on and on. They met in Harlem, and some of that was also including Mahalia Jackson. Okay, let's be real about that whole piece. And the consequence of that is Black jazz took the country by storm, but it was its mother location was when a group of people, because jazz was also vilified, sexualized, demonized, right? Everybody doing it now. How's that? Of every ilk. But it was it was like a house. It was like a culture. And people suggested it was sleazy. Now, of course, it was kind of sleazy. It still is a little sleazy. Sleazy is not problematic for me, by the way, because it embraced human emotion and human sexuality without fear and without self-diminishing the individuals that were involved. But it was very similar in terms of breaking free the boundaries, and it moved from one thing to another. So I see that also as holy work, because these were people who also loved God. These were Ella Fitzgerald and her crowd, her people. These were people that also loved God and used their love for God in the blessing that is a whole genre now of music in our nation. So anyway, I can go on and on. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to testify. God bless you.
Bishop Pearson, greetings to you. We're so glad that you made it, and happy birthday to your mom. Will you please just greet us for the few minutes you're going to be here with us?
Well, I rushed away from the party because Mama's 92, and I don't even think she knows it's happening. So I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do, but I didn't want to miss this. This was one of the programs I wanted to really learn and listen more than actually participate. But blessings to you, brother Michael Roberson, for your courage, your talent, your amazing artistic, scientific spirituality and psychology, and for who you are on the earth so courageously. What can we say? Thank you for being you and for helping us understand more clearly and directly the power of the giftedness of people who are particularly same gender loving people who've been mistreated, vilified, denigrated by church folk who struggle with their own issues of self-worth. And but we'll look back on these days. Bishop has been talking about the talent that has been in the New York area and the Apollo all these years. You guys were precursors. That what happened there really was embraced by the church distantly, but most of the Black folk with talent got it in the church and carry that anointing wherever they go, from Aretha Franklin to Whitney Houston to you. So I just want to celebrate all that you are, and that you are being radically inclusive, that you've included a heretic like me that's saved. Ain't that beautiful?
You know, I remember meeting you, and when I went to the conference 2 years, it was 2019, right? 2 years ago, and you used that language, heretic. I said I got to start using that. I said, because if Ballroom is not that, it's absolutely that. But I have a great friend of mine, a mentee, if you will, named Michael Rice, who's an independent filmmaker. And when I sent this out, he did a wonderful documentary called Party Boy, looking at crystal meth and its impact on Black, Latino, gay men. And when I sent this out, he said, "Oh my God, I have to be on this. I have to witness, because you were his bishop when he was a young boy in Tulsa, Oklahoma." Michael Rice, and he's an independent filmmaker now. So he wanted me to shout him out. Shout to you.
What's his name again?
Michael Rice.
Rice?
Yes.
I gotta find it. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's incredible. I'm elated. Whenever I do Broadway, I got to go see Motown, and they took us backstage. I think I told you this already, Bishop. They took us backstage, and all these young people poured out from the dressing area. I didn't want to go. I was tired. In-Game, who did the movie, gave us these tickets, and so we went. But when they came out, they were all children or mostly grandchildren of gospel music, radio people, record store owners, preachers, and they were rushing to take pictures. I want to take pictures with them, but they were rushing to take pictures with me and calling their grandparents on the phone, saying, "Guess who's here?" I felt ancient, but the talent was off the chain. I mean, the lady that played Aretha Franklin, the one who played Stevie Wonder, all these guys, they were all standing around talking. It's time for us to really break forth into the world with our talents unapologetically. And please tell the bishop I said hello, Michael, and that tells him to reach out, that I'm proud of him. Don't forget me when he's rich and famous. And let me also say this. The word apostate literally means, both in Greek and Latin, runaway slave. And so in addition to being a heretic, I am a leader of an apostate church, one of the leaders. So are you, Bishop Flunder. So are you, Bishop-elect Vanessa. We're runaway slaves. We are running out, not just from, but to the freedom, and encouraging others. It's not an underground railroad, though. We're doing it above ground. So people are listening and watching. That's why this program is so important each week, because we're not underground anymore. We're saying there is a way out, there's a way through, there's a way to the freedom, and we can maintain it. And I think we'll look back on these days and say, yes, 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 we were a part of it in the most honorable way. So I wear heretic and apostate very proudly.
It looks good on you too, sir. I want you to.
Thank you all so much.
It feels good most of the time.
Yes. I want to thank you, but I want to
Mama, I love, okay?
Yes,
I would do
please,
that.
Bishop. Please,
Thank
please,
you.
please.
Absolutely. Sure.
Michael, I want to say to you, so basically something that Bishop Pearson just said, the house and ballroom, they ran away. And they created something where they could be, where they could survive and thrive and flourish, right? So much so until visibility was created for them. And nobody created it for them. They created them for themselves. And so now in 2021, we can look on national syndicated television and see a show called Pose, right? Which I know you had a lot to do in terms of its development, right? And content and what should and should not be in the show. Say more about that for us, please.
Well, real quick too, that wonderful, I got to steal that language now, the whole apostle runaway slave thing, because that's just blew my mind. So that's number one. Number two, but that is absolutely, but I want to say this because Ballroom's it's special, but not that special, right? That it has done because it's Black. That's what Black folk have always done. It's the ontology of Blackness, right? And so to Bishop Flunder's wonderful point around jazz, that, I'm a believer that all Black music is theological, right? My definition of theology is about when people make meaning out of their life and suffering. And that is why the spirituals created on slavocracy, created a language that the master could not own, but a way to organize, and blues afterwards, and all these other things. I talk about hip hop and house music. But so Ballroom is ontologically Black, and so that is absolutely what it did. And if you think about Harlem at that time, right, in this one space, we usually talk about Harlem as if it's the borough of Brooklyn, right? That is huge, but it is a small section of Manhattan, no more than about 20, 30 blocks north to south, no more than about 15 blocks east to west. And in this space, you have James Baldwin, at one time, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Ella Fitzgerald, and Ballroom. So, of course, there's a language that's being spoken to one another that allows Ballroom to do what it does. So it is special, right? But it's not that special, right? That it is part of what Black folk have done. There's a wonderful, Bishop, when you invoice Sylvester and his voice and singing in such a way in clubs, I have this sort of pushback, though I give RuPaul credit for what he's been able to do with RuPaul Drag Race, but I problematize it in a way that because it's oftentimes done through a white queer lens, that for me, when I was younger, that drag performance, we called it drag performance because we didn't call trans women at the time. Unfortunately, we call them drag queens. So most of these performances were done by trans women, and most of them were done on Sundays. And that's not accidental, right? That this is the day that we were ostracized systematically out of church. So the club space became our church. And the trans woman who performed was like the Black woman who I went to see every Sunday in church, right? And so the lip sync was what I call a hermeneutics of the body, a way to contextualize pain and joy, desire, right? But it also was a homily, a way to minister to a people that have been so ostracized. Part of our problem, though, particularly as Black gay men, is our disability to engage in our patriarchy. Because what we had done for trans women in those spaces is what Black church has done for Black women, use them as spectacles and not engage in their full humanity, right? So I bring that up to place in conversation, Bishop Flunder, that you talked about Sylvester. There's a woman, a trans woman who's no longer here, named Princess Jeanette, who oftentimes did the same exact thing. She was ballroom, she was in a pageant scene, she was also a showgirl, and she would do the same thing. And people thought, in some ways, they was like, this is blasphemy. You know, how could you be doing this? And then when she began to perform, she held court in the middle of a club, right? After people started dancing from one, they stopped and watched her. And so for me, again, this thing, that ballroom is special, but it's not that special, because in many ways, it is what I call a reflection of ontology of Blackness. So let me leapfrog to Pose, if you will. Pose and other shows come about. There's a tension around what it means to be visible and sort of dialectical to being underground. Because there's a piece around underground that's powerful, right? There's a piece where underground saved lives. The unfortunate part is that you can tell when marginalized people are gaining greater access to visibility because their bodies are being murdered or brutalized, right? So the reason why you're seeing trans women being beat and brutalized so much so now is because they're becoming more visible, right? And so there's a relationship. So underground save lives. And so, but there's also a piece, I always believe that the marginal, its project one day is to not be marginal anymore. And so we have to sit with that tension. And so part of the challenge is that when you become so visible, you perform the politics of respectability, right? You perform the politics of wanting to be seen, and you can be commodified in such a way. So there was, for me, that danger with shows like Pose. But I was blessed enough to be one of the cultural consultants, along with my beautiful child, Twiggy Poochie Carlton, along with Genovia Chase, along with Jack, Ms. Rahi, and some other folks, to give a certain kind of credence to the show. Ryan Murphy and Stephen Canals. Stephen Canals is the Afro-Latino gay man who created it, and Ryan Murphy was the executive producer. I mean, he did some wonderful things around creating space as we met with him for Ballroom, not only to be part of the show, but how we can engage in things of telling our own stories. How do we go beyond and be in the front of the camera, so we allow some folks to do director's apprenticeship and all those things. And it's important, yes, because now that the trans woman who lives in Iowa that has no access, we live in a bubble oftentimes in New York City, can now see herself. There's a theology around seeing oneself that is absolutely important, that if you don't see yourself, then you believe that you're so insignificant, right? And so there's the other piece around that, when who has the right to tell your story. And so that has been that trying to balance that we're trying to walk, if you will. And so you see shows like Pose, and Vice had a show called My House, and there's a show Legendary that's out now. It's a competitive show. I mean, in some ways, 2006 it began. 2009 it began with Vogue Evolution going on MTV's American Best Dance Crew. That was created by Pony and Deshawn. And so you're seeing those things, but we are finding ourselves being sort of trying to walk that fine line. Important, though, for us to sit there. The liberal thing is always to reconcile quickly. The radical thing is to always wrestle with, because it's in the wrestling with that you create new forms of being and new discourse and all this other stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's that rumbling with it, because I know that there was some tension, and there is tension around that. But I think that's very important for you to highlight that on tonight, right? That, yeah, there's visibility, but how far does that visibility go until people become invisible, or until, people forget who they really are and where they came from, right?
Can I say this real quick? Thank you for
Yes.
what you just said, which is, here's an interesting space that we sit in now, right? So 2020, this global pandemic of AIDS. I remember Dr. Reverend Jackie Lewis, who was a pastor of
Middle collegiate.
Middle Collegiate, right? First Black woman, first woman. And she asked me to be part of their Revolutionary Love Conference that had to turn to virtual in 2020. And she asked me if I could get Dominique Jackson to place in, for her and I to have a conversation on what does Ballroom have to say at this moment. And I thought about something, and I said to her, there's an interesting thing as COVID has made us take, the universe has made us take a global pause at one time. There are three propositions that I think that God is asking us to ponder on. The first one is a philosophical one. Who do you desire to be? Not who are you, but who do you desire to be? You now have the power to choose how you're going to show up in this universe. The second one's a theological one. How do we desire to love, and love differently and more expansively? That in the work that we are doing, if we're not engaged in James Baldwin's ethic of love, that is moot. And the third one's a political one. How do we begin to politically organize? How do we move away from politically organizing around the right not to die and move towards the right to live? Those are two separate trajectories. Black folk have always been fighting around the right not to die and been told that you have a right not to die, and not understand we have a right to live and live well, right? And so I say all those things, and then all of a sudden May happened, and George Floyd, right? So the re-energize of Black Lives Matters, the spotlight on police brutality of a Black man's body. But what also happened a week later, same place, Black trans woman Ayanna Dior, about 30 or 40 people beat her in a store, drag her out. She's tumbling with her, drag her out. Somehow in the moment, don't understand. This is how you know the ontology of Blackness, right? Somehow in the moment, she had the historical wherewithal to say, I'm going to drag myself in this store, even though there's 40 bodies on me. And I'm going to do it because if I am going to be beat and die, it's going to be on camera. It's Emmett Till's mother. It's Emmett Till's mother. And so I bring that up because, to your point around visibility, part of pose, part of all of that allows for Ayanna to get beat, right, to some degree, but still no outcry. There was no outcry, right? In this same city, a week later, and absolutely no outcry, right? And so here we are now in 2021 in the 40th anniversary of AIDS. The community has been so ravaged with AIDS, and the question becomes, how is this happening in beyond public health? When we talk about Black Lives Matters, and there's still no outcry, and so visibility does not necessarily equate to freedom.
Truth. Bishop, you want to say something? Pearson, you are muted, sir.
Saying, Michael, you need to write. Maybe you have. You're brilliant, and you're just pulling back a veil. Your use of the language, your passion. Come out the closet, dude, with all that intelligence. I mean, you've got plenty to say, and I'm a student. We're learning. There's so many millions of people who are well-meaning, who have good hearts, good spirit, are just as ignorant. And ignorant doesn't just mean to not know, it means to not notice or to not make note of, to ignore. And we know what's happening, but we've ignored it as a culture. You're making us confront our own ignorance, and silence is violence. So I didn't like the story you just told. I didn't know that happened so quickly right after the
George Floyd.
The George Floyd incident. This is very pivotal, very powerful. We need to hear more from you. And as Vanessa, you always bring the best speakers on, the most enlightened people, and they bring light. And I just can't thank you enough. You're absolutely, if you don't write a book, Michael, I'm gonna take my belt off and get somebody with me. Write the book, dude, or just start talking. Have your own program like this where you look in that camera and just educate us. You have so much to say. I really encourage you to say it louder and longer. And I'm listening.
I'm blessed. Also, I back into that. You know, I watched Henry Louis Gates' documentary on the Black church, and I was kind of skeptical at first because I thought, you know, I love him, but he plays it safe sometimes, right? Safe, not right. And I'm sitting there, and I was teared up because how God has placed me in relationship with greatness. That 6 people on that documentary from Bishop, could not wait. I was like, oh no, they're not going to have no Bishop Flunder on here. They have all so that from Bishop Flunder, Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, who I'll talk about a little later, who's had one of the greatest impact on giving me language to codify the work that I've been able to do. But Dr. Cornell West, who was also my professor, for Dr. I can't think of her first name, Pearson, that's at Princeton, who was, I mean, from in fact, Bishop Flunder and Yosef Surratt were part of my first master thesis project, talking about Dr. Cohn. And so that to me is when the universe is saying that in which is being done through you, you're not doing it. It's being done through me, is greater than I, right? And so I only say that to place in a conversation with the wonderful sentiments that you just said to me, Bishop Pearson. So thank you for that.
Dude, amazing.
Wow.
Bishop Flunder?
Well, this is a wonderful experience here tonight. Just to see, this is our son, Bishop Pearson. We'll talk more about this one as we go along. But there's a couple of things that came up for me. There was a question in the chat that lifted up some thoughts that I had that asked the question, do we use religion and cultural traditions to anesthetize our anesthetize our misunderstandings, discomfort, or being misled regarding the truth of our humanity and its journey? And I think about that because I, first of all, think that in the context of religion and culture, that is exactly what we have done. That we have learned how to navigate those realities of family and culture and religion in ways that skirt around our real humanity and our real truth. It's a dance, and it's a professional dance. It's, and you learn it from the people that have done it for years and years. But you said something else that I think is really centered to what it is, the overwhelming witness of this particular conversation that we've had again and again here at Gatekeepers. And that is that we need to stop pulling toward the center and trying over and over again to be regarded and accepted either by religion or cultural traditions that anesthetize us essentially and mislead us regarding the truth of our humanity. We first have to be able to name, what is the truth of my humanity? Who the hell am I? Not essentially, what is my performance art? Because I was taught well, but who am I? Who am I really? And can I be fully who it is that I am? And when can I find other people who are also willing to be fully living within their humanity? And can we together pull away from the center with enough courage to create something on the margins that will in some way liberate people from all of the falsehoods that cover our lives? We cannot fully be our greatest and highest selves until we become our greatest and highest selves, until we embrace and affirm our greatest and highest selves. It's such an important question. And I think that you touched on it in so many ways. We want free. That's what we want. If there's some way or another, we want y'all to go on and give us free. And if you don't do it, we must have the courage and the grace and the power and the self-affirmation enough to take freedom, to insist on it, and build out here on the margins something so great that the center takes a look at it and says, well, now, that's what we want, is that. How can we get that? You've done a great job doing that in so many ways, Michael. Thank you, and God bless you. Yeah.
I wanted to say really quickly to Ty Roberson, thank you so much for that question. And one day I was sitting here a couple of months ago. I started writing a prayer. I didn't finish it, but I started it off by saying, God, we do not want to be anesthetized. We want to be healed. Heal us from everything and everyone that hurt us, that broke us, that damaged our self-esteem, that abandoned us. I know you can do it, God. And I stopped right there. And you hit right on the point. We are being anesthetized because of religion, because of cultural traditions. And we have to find our way to wake up. You know, and the awakening is through our consciousness. You know, and there is a way that we can do that. There's a way that we can go about that. So thank you, Ty, for the question. Michael, let us go back to the Black church and this radical pedagogy. Let's go back to that, because I think that's the comparative that you're making is spot on. But I think that I want to tease it out more. Talk to us more about it.
So I brought up, a couple of things. I brought up the documentary for a reason, because it was a wonderful documentary. Could have done more, but it was a wonderful documentary.
It was very powerful, and it told the truth about what's happening.
Yeah, they had Act Up. It got to Sylvester and Bishop Flunder. I said, well, wait a minute, because I did not expect it to go there.
Right.
But you think about sort of the narrative, the conversation that the documentary held around when slaves could not worship with their master, so they created these praise houses, right? Praise houses, right? And so that is for me, that is that space. When we think about again, where Black queer folk could not be free in this new space of freedom called Harlem with their kinfolk, that drag balls become these praise houses, right? And all people, especially Black folk, that when we are ostracized, we're going to find new spaces that speak to that pain, right? My push for us is to go beyond the pain. That our belief that the only way that we come together is through only pain, right? Because that becomes pathology. So for me, to that point around it being the Black church, it is absolutely that. I mean, it is the space where not only the theology of mattering is so significant, but you can be erotic and divine at the same time, right? No judgment.
That's that both and. Come on. Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Understanding that if God is omnipresent, there's absolutely nowhere that she is not. Absolutely nowhere, right? And that if that is the case, that also means that she must be within you. In fact, when you look in the mirror, you must see God looking back at you. So for me, Ballroom is a reflection of that, right? And so that to me is why it's also Black church. But there's also, come on, let's be real clear. Bishop Flunder laid it out. There's these cultural productions, right? There's these cultural, but there's the sachet that she talks about. There's all of those things that absolutely a Ballroom. I could, if this was a different space, show a video. It's a wonderful, iconic trans woman. She is one of the judges on the show Legendary on HBO Max. Her name is Naomi Maldonado. Naomi, we interviewed her in 2009. My great colleague Robert Simber interviewed her for the Arbor Centennial Ballroom Oral History Project. And one of the things she said was, to be Black and Latina and born in the Bronx is to be angry all the time. I vogue to save my life. That's the same conversation that James Baldwin said to be Black and relatively race conscious is to be angry all the time. I write to save my life, and they exiles to Paris. While oftentimes we'll show Leomi voguing in this new ballroom space called Paris. We are having all these young, particularly young Black gay men, young Black migrant African gay men, watching her perform. And she goes into this thing, Latin terms called kenosis, when one empties oneself. And so the falling, the dipping, she empties herself for the salvation for everybody else. And what you begin to hear is them scream out her name, Leomi. And so what does it mean then for this Black Latina trans woman to hear her name being screamed in a space called a club that's like a church, like you are Jesus? That's salvation, right? But there's a danger to that because that's how Black women have been, right? Black women have been salvation for everybody else, but nothing left for herself. And that is a problem to some degree with this narrative. It's a problem with the crucifixion resurrection narrative anyway, that it has dangerous impact on marginal people, particularly Black women. And so that's the both thing, that we're wrestling with these things, right? That Black trans women have created this space that they empty oneself, that we lift them up like Jesus, but they're crucified. They're crucified. There's no resurrection. Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman talks, we call this dip that we do in ballroom, we call it the Machiavelli dip, but people outside the community calls it a death drop. She sort of crystallizes, says, here is the crucifixion, resurrection of Christ in this space. So that's that. The other thing I'll talk about that Bishop Flunder laid out, I was blessed enough to have Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, as a professor. And I wrote a paper, he taught a course on Du Bois. And I wrote a paper trying to thought I was being, smart, called The Gay Souls of Black Folks, of course, nuancing the souls of Black folks. And toward the end of the paper, I talked about that people had pushed back on me and said, shouldn't your project be in seminary to unmask the Leviticus Code and its homophobia? And I said, that's someone else's project. It's not mine. I said, because I'm not interested in looking in the Bible to find notions of my divinity to say I'm divine, because it's the same crime. That's saying I have to look for something outside of me to say I'm divine. And I went so far to say I wouldn't care if Jesus himself knocked on my door and said, Michael Roberson, you've been telling a lie all this long time. You are an abomination. I would look Jesus in his face and say, you're not talking to me. Can't be. I then went so far as to say, but Jesus, in my understanding, would never say that in the first place. And yet, even if he did, he's not talking about me, because that is not who I am. But I only get that courage, again, as I open this up, being born through the womb of that Black woman that I call my mother. Because had not, I don't know if I had the courage to even say something like that. And the last thing I'll say about this thing about radical pedagogy and Black church, one of the beautiful people I have been in great dialogue with since I've been at Union Theological Seminary is a woman named Dr. Charlene St. Clair, who is my sister, my love. And she really has helped me concretize it, as Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman gave me the language to codify theologically. Charlene has gave me the language to codify a ballroom as a community organizing initiative, that it organized politically, oftentimes better than other communities, that it's grounded in such a community ethos, already organized through kinship structures, already organized through house structures, already organized geographically by having coalition of leaders all ready to move, you give them an order. And so that, to me, that's that piece around, again, this relationship of being the Black church, but also a radical pedagogy. Even though I'm talking about community organizing, the other piece of radical pedagogy is the sort of the public health interventions that we've been able to create.
Let me add something that might sound a little bit difficult for church folk to hear, but I've been in the church literally all my life, the Black church, not exclusively, but particularly, as you all know. I find it after 50 years of being a licensed and ordained minister, that the church in many ways has almost cured nothing and treated a little. It's been like a pawn, a prop, or a placebo. It hasn't healed our racism, our sexuality, our sensuality, our sociology, or our spirituality. It has treated these human realities, but it sits almost like more of a placebo than anything. We think if we go to church, especially if we quicken, that we felt God and that's enough. And we don't, it has even lost a lot of its human rights and social vitality, as it was in the days of Dr. King. And Reverend Jesse is 82 or something like that now. We're losing these guys and their expression. The Mahalia Jacksons and her music carried us through. But we've got to get beyond pawns, props, and placebos to the real core of who we are and who we aren't, and confront ourselves with it. We've been busy combating, but not confronting. We've got to stop and just look at who we are and who we're not, and then discuss what that means. Are we being treated? And if we are, for what? Or are we being cured? And if we are, for what? The people who left the church and went to the ballrooms and went to the pool rooms and went to the Apollo and went out into the world, they got some treatment too. But there's a lot of anger because we felt disenchanted, disillusioned by the church. We need to connect whatever that thing was supposed to do for us, because it hasn't done it. And I'm not saying that it is doing it. So we've got to find a way. Our generation must find a bridge or be the bridge, not just over the troubled waters, but stop the waters from being troubled so much.
It's something that Desmond Tutu said. And one of the things he said was that it's good that, and I'm paraphrasing, we can keep getting people out the river. We can keep saving people out the river. But the most important thing is to find out why they keep getting thrown in the river.
Yeah.
Why they keep getting thrown in the river. And I think that is something, that's the church's work, right? Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to say to Michael is that, Michael, when we talk about the Black church and we talk about the ballroom community, not just to Michael, but just to people that are listening, we keep saying, what is the church going to do? How are we going to create a new thing after this pandemic is over, post-pandemic? We're still in the pandemic, but post-pandemic, what is church going to look like? Well, the ballroom community showed us what church could look like, how it could be, right? And I think that we have a lot to learn from the house and ballroom community. So I just wanted to make sure that I made that statement. They showed us what church could look like, how church could be without the structure that we're normally used to, but in their own way. And I think that there's something to that lends itself to us trying to figure out what our next move is going to be. Bishop Flunder?
There's a parallel, a strong parallel between what Michael is saying and what Bishop Pearson is saying in my thinking. And it is because, for instance, we can't be healed from being Black. There's no healing from that. And there are people that diminished and demeaned us because we were people of African descent, and still do. There's no healing from being Black. You're Black, okay? But there is a healing from feeling that you are less than because you're Black. Those are two very different things. Same conversation about human sexuality. People say, well, you need to come up and be healed. To your point, Bishop Pearson, I didn't experience people getting healed and set free from being gay or being trans. They wept and cried and rolled on the floor and laid down in puddles of tears. And they left there, they came gay and they left gay. And if they did remain, they remained under this cloud, the cloud being, as long as I never say gay, there are people that can assume that I'm not, right? And that is still the reality. And the people that were covering them knew they were gay, but they needed their talent and their money. And so this was the understanding that we will just not name this thing in the room. It's the thing between gay and free and gay and delivered is the stay gay, but don't say gay. It's in the middle, okay? And that's a part of the reality. Well, that's to your point. This is not healing. This is subterfuge. And the subterfuge, I have to also say that there are the children that that are comfortable to some degree with that reality, because they know that the system holds it in place and they feel some modicum of safety because of that system. But I'll go one step further and answer this question that Bishop-elect asked. So what in the world do we do here? What is the do? Now that we are able to name the issue, what is the do? And I want to lift up again the fact that Jesus was or had to deal with the same realities when he stood gazing at the temple and the processes. You've heard me say this perhaps before, but the processes and the ways in which those things fed into each other. The seller of pigeons and doves, who knew that the normal people could not afford pigeons and doves. Then the loan sharks, who would loan you money, the money changers, loan you money so you could buy a pigeon and dove. And then the system that required you to have a pigeon and dove so that you could sacrifice that pigeon and dove to get your sins removed. All of those things working against the poor who were suffering to have all of those needs met in order to please God. And Jesus took off his overcoat and tied up his loincloth and went through the temple and tore up everything. Flipped the table on the money changers. I can imagine doves and pigeons flying around all over the place. I can imagine the priests cussing in whatever ways priests would cuss, because everybody's money got messed up that day. The whole system was completely destroyed because Jesus said, "This is not my Father's house. You have together made it a den of thieves." And not just people's money, but people's integrity, people's pride,
Their dignity.
Their dignity, their sense of self. Am I right? Sense of self-worth. Mm-hmm. And I would say to you, the only way we will change it is if we get table flipping disgusted about it. Amen.
I'm close to there. That's good. Let's flip some tables. I like it. Instead of dancing on them, flip them.
Yep. And to Darlene Franklin's point, Pastor Darlene Franklin is on, and she said that the church is busy churching people and not transforming people.
Right.
And so there's that. Michael, there's some questions in the chat. I want to take a stab at least two of them. People are asking you about the paper that you wrote and where they could get access to that paper. But in the meantime, the first question is, how does one respond to the falsehoods and dehumanizing tactics used based on biblical doctrines to exile queer folks? Should there be a response? Do you have a response to that question, Michael?
You know, I go back to my response to what I said about writing that paper. Oh, you talking about that paper? I was like, what paper are they talking about? That was in school. But the paper I wrote for Dr. West, which is I'm not interested, but this is my stuff, so it's not everyone's methodology. I'm not interested in talking to white folk around why blackness matters. It's not. I'm not interested in talking to straight folk around why gayness. I'm just not. So that's someone else's project. So I don't know how to answer that except for the reverse. That my desire was to not only change that narrative around abomination, to really to construct a narrative around divinity. Right. And I didn't want to, and again, at first, wanted to deconstruct in order to construct. And I found that not useful. Because for me, it created the same crime. I mean, so for me, it is that. I'm gonna give you a good example. And one of the biggest arguments that I used to get into at seminary was this notion of perfection. Right. So we were in class. I used to say, well, of course we perfect. They said, oh no, we're not perfect. We go back and forth. We fall for sin. I said, we go back and forth. I said, no, we're perfect. We went back and forth. They said, no, we make mistakes. I said, absolutely, we make mistakes. That's what we do. But you're confusing doing and being. right? The very essence of who you are, in my belief, this thing that we call soul, is absolutely perfect. There's nothing you can do to add or take away from. It just is, as the Bible says that God said to Moses, tell him I am, right? It just is. There's nothing you can do. And so there was a colleague of mine who was pregnant at the time and said, no, Michael, no. I said, you're telling me we are sinful. We were born to sin. I said, you are saying, suggesting that beauty that is in your belly, that's sin. And she had to stop. And I never tell people they're wrong. That's not but it's to have this thought, right? And so I say that to say, so I'll go a little further. And then we got a conversation around this notion of the devil. And I just said that I don't believe in the devil. That was just my stuff. They said, well, what do you mean you don't believe in the devil? What is the antithesis to God? What's the opposite of God? I said, well, you say, and I say God is all that is all. So the opposite of all that is all is nothing that is nothing. I said, but let me say something very differently. I said, do you believe that the God that we've been taught is omnipotent, all powerful? They said, absolutely. I said, do you believe that the God that we've been taught is omnipresent everywhere at the same time? They said, yes. I said, that means that God is with us right now. This is with the little boy in China at the same time. They said, absolutely. I said, you believe that God is omniscient, is all things? They said, yes. I said, well, then if that being the case, then where is this devil? I said, let me say it differently. Is God in hell with the devil? And they said, absolutely not. I said, but that would mean God is omnipresent. I didn't make up the word. I didn't make up the definition. The definition said it's everywhere at the same time. I said, but also, so if God is omnipresent, where else must God be? They said, within me. I said, so let me then say one more thing. I said, do you believe, as we've been told, that we're a reflection of this all-powerful, or everywhere, all things God? They said, absolutely. I said, let me tell you what science says, mathematics says. I said, I didn't make this up. Mathematics says this. I drew a big circle on the board, drew a smaller circle, made a connection. I said, this is God, and this is you. Mathematics says that the raindrop has the same qualities and kindness as the ocean, just difference in degrees. I said, so that would then mean that God and your reflection of God, if God is perfect, you have the same kindness of perfection. It's in scientifically and mathematically impossible to you to be reflection of perfection and be sin. That doesn't make, so it has worked with young black gay men. So hearing that and having to sit with that and say, then that would mean that you can't be an abomination. I don't care what someone tells you. You cannot. It's mathematically and scientifically impossible. That is not my woo-woo spiritual stuff talking. But it's my ability to be brilliant enough to some degree to intersect quantum mechanics and theology in such a way. So to respond to that question, I don't go back and forth. Last thing I'll say to that, this thing around Dave Chappelle, right? The thing that the joke he had made in his special, but prior to that, I remember in 2015 or 16.
Several jokes, not just one. Yes.
2015, 16, he had made this comment that he would never take the role of a black gay man because it was Hollywood's attempt to feminize the black man. And the T.I. said the same thing, Nate Parker. And God has a way, just like a queen, to snap in your face. All of a sudden, here out of obscurity, this movie called Moonlight that was in just independent film festivals, all of a sudden wins grand prize at the Golden Globe, right? And then grand prize at the Oscar. At the same time, Kim Morrell's video got leaked and what she said. And I began to have conversation with some of my black heterosexual colleagues and said, this thing around black homophobia is incredible. I said, because it's incredible for this reason. The most emblematic event around the black struggle for freedom post-slavery is a 1963 march on Washington that Baird Rustin organized, an openly black gay man, right? I said the most emblematic event around the black struggle for freedom post the 1963 march on Washington is Black Lives Matters. And 3 black women created it, 2 are black queer women. How could you be very homophobic against the very people that God in the past 50 years have brought your freedom through? That's called plantation psychosis. The belief that you're free when you are demonizing the very people that God has brought your freedom through. So that's oftentimes been my response to these kinds of things. Not to respond to it directly, but it's my desire is for God to use me for my folk, not necessarily just to address those things.
He's a preacher, isn't he, Bishop Pearson?
Somebody just said, Michael, where's your church? I want to go to your church. Hello.
Come on now.
So, Erica Carter, who we know this is a part of the fellowship, asks, when are we going to talk about Black transphobia? Now, Erica, I believe that he made mention of it, but Michael, you muted.
Absolutely, because it's not just only by it's not just only by Black cis men who identify as heterosexual, but it's also done. So there's a wonderful video that I oftentimes show of Sylvia Rivera, Puerto Rican trans woman, comes out of Stonewall, 1973. She's at a gay liberation rally in Washington Square Park, and they don't want her to get on stage. And she forces herself on stage, and she talks about the audacity in many ways for you not to allow me to get on the stage, when in fact, my body as a Puerto Rican trans woman and other trans folk of color has allowed for us to even have a space called Liberation Rally, right? The audacity of that. And the folks who were in the room, in the front, who did not want her to speak, were what we call at the time these radical white lesbians. This theme that trans women had no space in a feminist movement because they brought male energy. Let me up something. In the late 70s, Black trans woman named Tracy Africa Norman, first Black trans woman supermodel of the world. In 1977, she was in Vogue Italia. She was in a Curl Box. And then in the early 80s, she gets her work taken away because it comes out that she's trans. And as the story goes, is that it was Essence Magazine and Susan L. Taylor, as the story goes. And part of that, again, is what constitutes a woman. So when we talk about transphobia, it's not just from Black cis men who identify as heterosexuals, but it's also been from women, from feminist movements, but it's also been from those who are supposed to be the allies, the supporters of Black trans women, with Black gay men, right? That in the way that though we may have lift Black trans women up, that we use them only as spectacles, are not interested in their full humanity, are not interested in engage in real life work, don't show up when they're beat and brutalized, are not using our voices enough to support. I mean, so for me, it comes in all forms. But what I will say is that if we don't begin to engage in a conversation, particularly around the continued beating and brutalizing of Black trans women, there's no such thing called Black freedom. Because one of the things we're suggesting, we know this very well, that whose lives matters most in Black Lives Matters, and then we're saying that Black trans women's lives matter the least. And it's always through the least of these where freedom comes through. So.
Brilliant is as brilliant does, and that be Michael Roberson. We thank you so much tonight. There are several questions, but we're going to stop because it's already 9:30. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time, for your talent, for your energy, and for your love for the house and ballroom culture, for the love for your people, for the love for our people. Thank you so much for your brilliant presentation tonight.
Can we do one thing?
Yes.
I would like us to do literally and virtually. Extend a hand toward Michael and ask Bishop Pearson to offer a prayer of blessing over his life and ministry. His yes is right at the surface, and there is a yes that needs to come. And I would love for us to pray for him in this moment.
I think that's wonderful. And so let me just say the Facebook Live audience because I see all your comments, Michael, when you get a chance, go back and look at the comments and listen to what people are saying about what you're saying and about you.
Yes.
And I know that you don't need anybody else's affirmation, but I hope it pushes you off the edge and that you text me or you call mama or somebody and tell us about it. People want your contact. They want to know where you're teaching at. They want to know how you're teaching, how often and where. And so you need to know that, right? You need to know that. So Facebook Live, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. We're going to pray for this brother. He is beloved amongst us and amongst you. And we know that God is already doing something special in his life. It's evident. Bishop Pearson?
Brother Michael, you, like most same gender loving people I know, are ominous. The middle word for abomination is omen. You are an omen. You have prophetic significance. There is something auspicious and not awful, but awesome about you and the anointed people you represent on the planet. I don't think you're having any problems with self-worth, but I just want to say to you that I recognize the divinity that you bring to this table and to this planet, to this plane of consciousness. Know that if anybody says it's an abomination, says I'm ominous, I'm something to be regarded, I'm something to be respected, I'm something to be noted, I'm something to be almost worshipped. And I don't mean that in an idolatrous sense, but you are an idol. All the same gender loving people that I know are the most scientific, gifted, brilliant, spiritual, nurturing people. There's a special something that's the universe is exposing to you and expelling from us in that sphere. So I bless you. I affirm you, not that you need it. I confirm you. And with our corporate intelligence and the power that's at this table and those who are watching, we decree and declare you the man of God, the woman of God, the person of God, the being of God and good in the earth. And may that expand well beyond any walls or any limitations or any derivations that somebody would like to contort about you. I salute you. I celebrate you. I recognize your intelligence, your brilliance, your theodicy, your theocracy, your theology. Go with it, man. The best is yet to come. And don't forget us when you get there. We go.
Amen.
I get so, as you see me do this, I become, this lights up, but I get the very uncomfortable place to be in when folks say things to me, right, around these things. And so I want to be absolutely express a certain level of gratitude for this conversation, for creating this space. Your Bishop elect Vanessa, you know you're my sis. Absolutely. Let me tell you something about. Let me tell you something about Bishop elect, because when other folks were not, I talked about radical pedagogy, and folks were dying. She opened up space for us to have services for these folk. When other folks were not, when the young man Mark in the house of Milan got murdered, she was out there marching. And I asked her, "Come be part of House Lives Matters." She said that the whole day on that Friday at Marriott. And so she always shows up and shows out. Everybody who knows me knows how I feel about Bishop Yvette Flunder. My mother passed in 2007, and she assured that when she passed, that she would send Black women in my space. Black women have always been. There's no Michael Roberson without Black women. I say that over and over and over and over and over again. So there's nothing but gratitude to thank Bishop Yvette Flunder for being in my life. It was absolutely my son. The last thing I say about this, my son who did this work hung himself that October, the same semester I had Bishop Flunder. And he did the work. He was out about being HIV positive. He was out about being gay. And he still hung himself, hung himself from a ceiling fan. And he wrote on Facebook that he could no longer live in a world grown so cold for those of us who live out of social norm. I so happened to have Bishop Flunder that semester. And so that's that confirmation that my mother was saying, here's mama now. And Bishop Carlton Pearson, you don't know this, but when I saw you 2 years ago, you were magnetic to me. Some of the language, so it's amazing to me that I'm in this conversation with you. But you are absolutely magnetic to me. That was my favorite. I tell you, it's one of my favorite days was at that conference at 2019. I talk about it oftentimes enough, but not enough to tell y'all I thank you all for allowing me to be in this space.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to the Beyond the Gatekeepers audience, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. We are so delighted that you stayed with us on tonight. We want to have a few commercials before you leave us. We want to make sure that we leave you with this. Our first announcement, Bishop Flunder will take.
God bless you, everyone. What a wonderful opportunity. What a shift in the universe, a shift in the atmosphere. We want to encourage you to support Beyond the Gatekeepers. If it has been a blessing to you, then bless Beyond the Gatekeepers. Listen to the voice of God, what the Spirit is speaking to you right now. I encourage you to support these broadcasts by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM Annual or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Let it happen. You can hear the voice of God. You can hear as we called it, the unction of the Spirit, encouraging you to sow into what it is that we are called to do for today and going forward beyond today. Be a blessing. God bless you.
Hello everyone, this is Jess Dominic, owner of Bullet in Flight Radio, your story, our station, a proud supporter of progressive Christians from around the world. So please join us every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. until 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the best in gospel house, gospel indie, and inspirational word. And if you're looking to submit your music or sermons, please send us an MP3 and artist pick to bulletinflightpros@gmail.com. All submissions are free. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.
And we have Lifestyle Global Properties. The proprietor is Antonio Mattier, and Lifestyle Global Properties presents Donate to Your Church. Give to your church while accomplishing your goal of home ownership. Lifestyle Global Properties will donate 10% of the commission earned from your real estate transaction to your choice of COR, which stands for City of Refuge, or TFAM, which stands for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, in your name. When you utilize our brokerage to purchase or sell a property, residential, commercial in California or Georgia. And so you can find that information out by Googling Lifestyle Global Properties. The owner and proprietor is Antonio Mattier. We thank God for Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams, who supports us on a weekly basis. RIM Virtual Experience, TNT, Tuesday Night Talks is what they have. It's the RIM Fellowship Church based in Atlanta. You can go to their website, which is www.rimatlanta.org. They invite you every Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everyday, real, relevant, Bible-led conversations. Please, again, check their website out at www.rimatlanta.org. We also have the Healing Place Apothecary. This is a company that is owned and operated and founded by Nubian Flunder. She is the daughter of our presiding bishop. You can go to her website at www.THP, which stands for the Healing Place, apothecary.com. That's www.thpapothecary.com, and you will find various skin products there. And if you have questions or concerns, you need a consultation, you can also receive that. Please support Sky Michelle. She is the kid boss. She has Sky Michelle's Teas and Things, where a kid is the boss. And you can go to her website at www.skymichelle.com. You will find different collections of shirts that she has. Dope Black, Faith, Y Flunder, which is Yvette Flunder's motivational quotes, Cara motivational quotes, and she also can customize any kind of t-shirt, sweatshirt, cup, anything that you need done. You can follow her on Instagram and on Facebook at I Am Sky Michelle. Let's support this little girl, please. We have Cara Solutions. Focus on your passion. Let Cara handle the rest. She does remote production. This is Susan A. Webley. She is the founder and video conferencing admin and tech support. And she can provide custom branding, show development, training. If you want more information, please go to her website at www.cara-solutions.com. And if you want a free consultation, you can email her at sue@cara-solutions.com. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, please, for more information, you can email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Have a very, very great evening.
Thank you.